Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Perlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Perlman.
Hello. For the next half hour, we are going to be talking about the impact of plastics and how to reduce the destructive effects of plastic products and the solutions that are possible with my guest, Simona Paganetto. She is the founder and company director of I'm Plastic Free. She has over 20 years of experience of commercialization, a decade serving in international brand management roles of Fortune 500, NASDAQ listed MedTech companies. She not only brings passion to end plastic and microplastic pollution, but also an understanding of the economic imperative in finding workable and sustainable solutions to do so. She is certified as a circular economy specialist by the Circular Economy Alliance in conjunction with the École de Ponts Business School in Paris, France. In 2023, she obtained a scholarship from the Chief Executive Women Organization at the Australia and New Zealand Banking Group ANZ, and in 2024 attended the Executive Education for Sustainable Leadership course by the Department of Environmental Health at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Over the years, she has built well-developed networks within circular startups that are driving the regenerative bioeconomy. Originally from Italy, she's lived and studied in 6 countries, speaks 6 languages, but we're going to be speaking English, and is a strong believer that diversity is essential to foster innovation and bring projects to success. She has had many awards and many former positions, including marketing manager for waste management industry, head of commercialization with the Universal Site Monitoring, international account manager for Asia Pacific École, product manager regenerative biomaterials, EMEA, that's Europe, Middle East, and Africa, Zimmer Dental, or Zimmer Biomet, and Associate Global Brand Manager, Zimmer Trauma, Zimmer Biomet. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on our program.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you very much for the invitation to this podcast interview.
You have done so much important work to try and solve a major problem that the whole world has, and that's plastics. It seems that plastics are everywhere in our homes, our offices. Everything we use seems to have a plastic component, and yet plastic is also very dangerous environmentally because it cannot always be recycled. It's polluting if people burn it, like in poor countries. So let's begin with actually what the current problem is with plastics. It's serious, I know, because I hear about the garbage patch in the ocean that's full of plastic.
Yes, you're right. Plastic presents a very serious problem around the world. It is 400 million tons of plastic produced every year. It is a systemic, invisible threat because plastic is not any longer just a litter issue in our oceans or on our soils, on our land. It has become as well an invisible threat. And the main reason is that plastic doesn't biodegrade. It degrades into finer, smaller particles that are called microplastics and then down to nanoplastics. And that has infiltrated pretty much everywhere, our soil, our ocean, as well as ultimately our body through the air we breathe, the food that we ingest, etc. So when I first encountered the problem of plastic pollution, it was 12 years ago in 2014. And it was because I had left a promising career in the medical device industry. I had migrated to Australia and was doing beach cleanups in the Whitsunday Islands. Back then, plastic pollution was not on the media as it became later on towards 2018-19. But I immediately felt how those remote islands were affected by plastic pollution. And despite we were cleaning those islands every single month, every single 2 months, etc., from our beach cleanups, the plastic kept coming in. So at the very first, I thought it was a problem related to developing countries that didn't have a well-developed waste management system. And later on, I basically discovered that it was a problem of the whole world. And ever since, I decided that since I had to reinvent myself in regional Australia, I would create a project that would be part of the solution, at least in this plastic pollution problem.
So many organizations yearly here in Southern California have those cleanup programs on the beaches, on the rivers, and the parks, and they think they're doing something. Of course, we don't want litter. We want a beautiful environment. But after they pick up all that trash, a lot of it plastic, it doesn't really go to a recycling center. It just goes into a landfill and fills up beautiful ecosystems.
Yes, you're right. And this is why it is a systemic issue. The plastic industry has been blaming the problem to consumers for littering, etc. But ultimately, it is a design issue. And it is a design issue because, as mentioned, plastic doesn't biodegrade. And if there was a product or a regenerative solution that would biodegrade into the environment, we wouldn't see this issue. So the beach cleanup and the cleanup programs are great, but they don't solve the problem at the source. In order to do so, we need to think about circular principles, for example, and have solutions, for example, like using more reusable system instead of single-use plastic products, or at the same time, for example, have replacement of plastics that biodegrade into the environment. It is compostable, like home compostable, even in your home backyard, and ultimately doesn't create any microplastic pollution problem. Recycling is part of the solution. However, worldwide, they say that roughly of these 400 million tons of plastic created, half of it is single use, and only 10% of it is recycled. So I don't see recycling as the ultimate solution to this issue. I think that we need to reduce drastically our plastic consumption in order to be able to solve the problem at the source, particularly in relation to microplastics.
We're going to be talking about some of those solutions, but let's talk about that recycling of plastics, because years ago, they started putting on products, at least here in the United States, this triangle, 1, 2, 3, and it makes you think, oh, it's recyclable, when in reality, there's so many different kinds of plastics and most of it isn't recycled. So explain those numbers.
Yes, absolutely. Those plastic, so triangles, they're called plastic identification resins triangle. They were introduced mainly by the plastics industry, misbelieving consumers that it means that all of those products or materials can be recycled. But that's not the case. It's just an identification of what type of plastics they are. For example, number one is PET, which is one of the most widely recyclable type of plastics. Number two is HDPE. This is also quite widely recyclable. An example could be milk jugs, for example. There are others, though, for example, like the number three, which is PVC. And like the cling wrap, for examples, or pipes, or many toys are built with this. And this is not, for example, widely recyclable. Others are more soft plastics, like number four, it's LDPE. And plastic bags are an example of this. And they require recycling facilities that are specialized in soft plastics, not in hard plastics. So that complicates the whole recycling infrastructures. Number five is PP, polypropylene. It can be recycled. For example, the lids of bottles, like drink bottles, milk bottles, are recyclable, but they're not recycled, for example, in the curbside recycling, at least not here in Australia, because they're small. There are specialized recycling programs, for example, that collect the bottle lids and recycles. One of them is the so-called precious plastics, where basically community organizations collect the lids and then recycle these lids into useful objects like vases for plants or pens or USB stick, etc. Number six is polystyrene. And it is a type of plastic that is not easily recyclable. For example, in Australia, we have a few facilities that collect polystyrene, but it's not widely recyclable. And it also very easily creates microplastics, for example, the extendable polystyrene, because it decomposes into those tiny little, very soft particles that go everywhere. And last but not least, number seven, it's other. And that means pretty much any other type of category of plastics that could be also bioplastics like PLA, This is polylactic acid type of plastics, and they are plastics that are compostable, however, only in industrial compost facilities. And these are not to be mixed with the other type of plastics because otherwise they cannot be recycled. In Australia, for example, we missed the infrastructure on how to recycle completely PLA, polylactic acid type of bioplastics. That is what makes pretty much the whole recycling infrastructure quite complicated. And a lot of items get collected, but collecting plastics and recycling plastics is a different story. It needs to go to the whole supply chain to be able then ultimately to become a recycled products. And there also needs to be demand for that recycled products in order for the plastic recycling industry to be viable.
Certainly, some plastics are going to be difficult to replace with alternatives. We're talking on a computer, it's got plastic. There's certain things that do use plastic that they haven't really developed an effective alternative. But in the food industry, for example, it seems like we don't need to get all our food and drinks in plastic bottles, plastic containers. Here in my area, some of the restaurants and some of the organizations and some of the stores are starting to provide the alternative, the paper bag instead of the plastic bag, providing a cup or a takeout container that's not made out of plastic, but out of some sort of natural biodegradable material. What are some of those materials? Because I know when they first started coming out, they weren't really too great. They had to be evolving to be better and to be usable and not to be more expensive.
Yes, absolutely. I see two solutions to this. One way, reusable systems. This is where, for example, even coffee cups or restaurant offer reusable cups that are able to be refilled and reused. So that's one way on how to solve the single-use plastic pollution problem. The other way is to create products made of biomaterials. And as you said, the industry has evolved in the meantime, and from PLA type of product, polylactic acid, to now have solutions, for example, that are films made of seaweed and other plant starch that are able to be used for those sachet type of condiment, single-use serveware condiments that are used for ketchup or for different type of oil and so on. And I see this as a good solution, for example, for takeaway. In terms of rigid plastics, yes, there are some other innovative solutions for packaging that are now being launched onto the global markets. For example, they utilize biowaste from agriculture, usually a fermentation of bacteria process that allows these plastics to still be rigid, but to be composted in a normal composting environment. And these products are usually made with PHA, polyhydroxyalkanoates. So there are quite a few startups that I follow with a lot of interest because they're bringing onto the markets these solutions. And in my opinion, this should be the bioplastics of the future.
I know that I go to some events where they want to say they're sustainable and they supposedly have the compost bin, the recycle bin, and the trash bin, and the trash bin's still overflowing. So get people to make the change.
Yes, this is why I think the ultimate solution is to try to reduce plastic at the source, which I call an upstream solution. And also the very reason why I created my own project, I'm plastic free, because all of the solutions that are vetted onto the platform do exactly this. They try to solve the problem at the source. And I can give you an example. For example, we have one company called Altitude Water that has an atmospheric water generation system, basically technology that is able to pulse out the humidity of the air and create clean water directly from it. So that solves the problem, for example, of buying single-use plastic water bottles, because you can utilize this machine, even connected to solar panels, for example, to directly have clean water in your home or in your work, etc., etc. There are other solutions, for example, that are like shampoo in forms of solid bars, or, for example, dishwashing liquid that instead of being in a liquid into a plastic bottle, it is made in form of a sachet that is home compostable in powder form. And all you need is, for example, warm water from your tap to fill up your forever or reusable bottle. This is what I use at home as well in order to reduce completely the necessity of buying those plastic containers and plastic bottles. When I started on my journey to try to be as plastic free as possible, I was encountering the problem of where do I find all of these products? How do I vet them? It's absolutely time consuming. And I know that being a mom and a full-time worker, nobody has the time to do all of this research. And so I thought, well, if I'm doing this for myself, I might as well helping others. And so I did. And it's the very reason why I created this platform for, I call it non-toxic plastic alternatives.
They can go to your website. It is I'm plastic free, even though your organization is I apostrophe M plastic free. The website does not have the apostrophe. It's IMPLASTICFREE.com.
Yes, that's correct. And exactly because it is a .com domain, despite I'm in Australia, my main market is in the US. So I offer solution basically for all English-speaking markets. So US, Canada, UK, Australia, and I try to offer as well solutions for Europe. But the main bulk of products and solutions are from North America.
Resources are so important because, as you indicated, people don't have time to do all the research, to do all the searching. I always wished for decades, since my environmental work from the 70s, that you go to the store and the recycled products are front and center, and the non-recycled products, the unecological products, are high up on the shelf, not the other way around. But unfortunately, we aren't at that point. In fact, we also have companies that have done a very effective job at public relations to convince people that somehow they need to buy bottled water, which I absolutely think is so unnecessary, at least in countries like the United States, where our water from our tap is tested every single day. We don't need to get water from a bottle that is transported, the cost, the waste of energy, material development. It doesn't make sense. However, I was really distressed because recently I returned from Borneo on the Indonesian side, and even at the high-end hotels, they say, don't drink the tap water. You have to drink the bottled water. And I don't like bottled water. What do I do?
Yes, I totally get what you mean, particularly when traveling in developing countries or countries where the tap water is not readily drinkable. I think the ultimate solution is to have water filtration that you can bring with you in terms also of tablets, sometimes that you can place also into the water to sanitize the water. There are water bottles now that come with a filtration system themselves that can be exchanged, or yes, like advanced atmospheric water generation machines are another solutions for those countries. In fact, I saw that Altitude Water has projects in Africa, for example, in order to help those countries and villages generate waters without the need of any plastics at all. I'm with you. I would never buy plastic bottles, and for two reasons. One reason is the plastic pollution in terms of littering and the waste that they create. And the other reason is microplastics. It's well known that those plastic bottles are full of microplastics and nanoplastics. So why, ingesting them liberally? I've not been using single-use plastic for many years. And this is where I suggest when people think about plastic free, they shouldn't think about their computer or their phone straight away. The first thing that they should think is about eliminating as much as possible all single-use plastics type that they use in their life. For example, it could be switching into a reusable water bottle, a reusable coffee cup, or a reusable shopping bag instead of having the shopping bags from the supermarket, or a reusable produce bags, for example. These are all the items that I suggest when people start. Start by those. You're already reducing your plastic waste dramatically. Takeaway is another source of waste, and microplastics at the same time because of containers touching hot food, with plastic container and food touching and migrating to the food. And this is where I basically suggest start with single-use plastics. You will reduce already by 50% your amount of plastics that you generate.
We're going to find out so much more about the impact of plastics, how we can reduce our use of plastics, use more sustainable solutions, ecological solutions to our everyday products when we return in a moment with my guest, Simona Paganetto, founder and company director of I'm Plastic Free.
Environmental Directions with Nancy Perlman continues with further discussion of the world's critical ecological issues. For more information, you may call 310-559-9160 or go to www.ecoprojects.org. Now, here's Nancy.
I'm speaking with Simona Paganetto, founder and company director of the organization I'm Plastic Free. We've been talking about plastics here in the United States, Australia, developed countries. In developing countries, poor countries, where I've traveled to so many around the world, I am devastated when I see people actually burning plastic for fuel, the toxics that they must be breathing. How do we get the message across to them that that's not a very wise thing to do?
Yes, this is a serious issue. People think that because plastic is made of oil, you can naturally burn it and create energy, but that has a lot of consequences. Plastic has some toxic materials, and when it is burned at very high temperature, it generates, for example, dioxins, furans, heavy metals, and these are bad for consumer, for people, because they're bad for their respiratory environment. They could create respiratory illnesses, asthma, skin irritations, even neurological type of damage. Unfortunately, these countries that maybe don't have a choice, don't have the choice, for example, of or the money to be able to buy products that are not made with plastics. And what corporations have created is, I'm not sure if you come across during your travels, those little sachets that have, for example, shampoo or body wash in little plastic packaging. And people buy these because they are much cheaper than buying a full bottle of shampoo. But what they do is they use them and then they discard them into the environment. And that contributes as well, again, to that little litter problem, particularly in countries where they don't have well-developed waste management system. In this case, I think those corporations should have the responsibility for this. It's called Extended Producer Responsibility, EPR. And they should either redesign those products, for example, to be made with flexible bioplastics that completely biodegrade into the environment. And these exist nowadays. It's just more expensive than normal plastic. Or they should be able, for example, to create refill systems. So people would go with their own little container and they would refill as much as they need for a little fee. I know it's easier said than done, but it's possible. It's only that, unfortunately, economies of scale have created this problem of having this little sachet that litter everywhere in developing countries.
I wish there were another term than bioplastics, biomaterials. The language doesn't really reflect the appropriate sustainable alternative. You are involved internationally. I mentioned earlier that you've lived in many countries. You've been recognized for your work in sustainability. You have been endorsed by the United Nations Environment Program Global Partnership on Plastic Pollution and Marine Litter. You have been a finalist in the Women in Digital Awards for the category Champion of Change. You certainly are advocating change. You have been recognized by the 36th Banksia National Sustainability Awards. 2024, you were endorsed by the United Nations Ocean Decade. I could go on and on. It would take the rest of the program. So what do you see internationally as the goal of organizations, companies? Are companies that are producing plastics willing to evolve and produce plastic only when there isn't an alternative and start producing the alternative? Is there an international movement so that we don't have to just work locally with our own laws in our own city, county, state, national levels?
Yes, there is quite a few NGOs, not-for-profit organizations that are doing very, very good work. For example, advocacy and policy implementation. One of them is the Plastic Pollution Coalition, for example, in the US, Plastic Free July in Australia. There is many more beyond plastics. There is so many. And they're doing great work in advocating for legislation that allows, for example, for reduction of single-use plastic. However, I think that unless there is the legislation, corporations will not stop produce plastics. And the reason being is too lucrative. And now moving away, for example, to renewable energy, producing plastic is another way of making use of oil. So in my opinion, there is also the component of consumer behavior. And because of microplastics, I've seen these changes over the year since I started from 2018 to now. People are now starting to change and want actively to reduce plastics in their life, not just because of the environment, but because of their own health. And when everybody's health is concerned, then people are starting to act. And I've seen this movement on my platform. I'm still have like an eco warrior and just attract eco warriors to my site. Now it's not just that. Now I attract pretty much everyone who really has heard about microplastics and they want to make changes to their life because of their health. And I see this as a good signal because we don't need a handful of people going plastic free and doing zero waste perfectly. We need millions of people being concerned about plastics, microplastics, and doing behavioral change. So I see this as a positive trend for humanity, that people are starting to realize the threats of plastic pollution and microplastic pollution. And this, together with proper legislation, will bring us into the right direction. I'm a positive person.
Glad you are positive, because that is necessary to motivate us to continue to make the changes necessary to make our earth safer and healthier and better. You've worked both in the nonprofit, volunteer sector, you've worked in the business sector, and I mentioned earlier some of the companies that you have worked with. Could you explain a circular economy? Because I know in Europe there are some laws in some countries where they require the companies to take back products and reprocess the product, repurpose it, and that the company's responsible. I remember as a child, we actually took back our soft drink bottles to be reused. That doesn't happen anymore. So it is possible. It was possible. Where do we go in this circular economy? What needs to be done?
Yes, it's a very good question. The circular economy will help in the transition to a less waste economy, because that's the ultimate goal. And Europe, particularly with countries like France, the Netherlands, have done already a very good work in this regard. For example, by legislating the fact that restaurants or food producers are not allowed to throw away food waste. They have, for example, to donate it to charity if it's still edible, or to prepare it for composting facilities, for example. Ultimately, food in landfill create methane, which is a potent gas and very, very bad for the environment. Another way on how the circular economy works is to extend the life of products. In this example, a product, instead of being thrown away to landfill, it can be resold onto other people. Ultimately, we have to redesign product at the source, eliminating the plastics from the source at the product design, through laws and policy development, and probably incentives as well to corporation. We would be able to achieve this. I hope I tried to explain a little bit the different concept of the circular economy. There is policy on one end and there is innovation on the other, and both need to work together to be able to move ahead within these concepts.
We certainly need to use every angle imaginable to work together to make the changes necessary. I know that you are active with many organizations like Women in Climate, Women in Digital, Women Environmental Leadership, Australia. Do you think women are leading this movement, or can we have both sexes involved?
Well, we certainly have both sexes involved. However, I can say, and through my experience, because I work with many, many small organizations, small businesses that are trying to do the right thing, and I would say there is a predominance of women that do care. They deeply care about the environment. They deeply care about our health.
I'm so happy that you have the vision, the passion, and that you are making a difference. Thank you so very much for informing us about what's going on in this world of plastic and what we can do and the alternatives that we can take. Thank you for being my guest.
You're welcome, Nancy. Thank you very much for the invitation today.
I have been speaking with Simona Paganetto, who is founder and company director of I'm Plastic Free. I'm Nancy Perlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310 559 9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Perlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.